How are things going for everyone?
Yeah, not bad, not bad.
Not bad, it's good.
Yeah, all good. Just too much to do, but apart from that, it's all good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I can entirely understand that. Indeed, even the ISO people are swamped at the moment. They just had a 1 week plenary and everything seems to be pushed back due to that. I'm still waiting on the go date for our ISO release. I expect it still this week, but
Hi Shane, this is Marcel.
Hi Marcel.
Hi, Marcel.
Yeah, that's quite a significant moment when you get that release. I've certainly been talking to many people about it, saying watch this space. So it's gonna be good when that happens.
Well, we're overdue for the release actually, so it's simply a matter of when they hit go on their side. But yeah, I mean, our main contact last week sent us a note, I think it was Monday, and was like, we're going to be really busy this week. We're slow to reply to email. And they were indeed. So still waiting on the word. But yeah, I'm pretty hopeful this week. We've got nothing left to do on the administrative side at all.
Good.
And our press release is ready in multiple languages. We've been very fortunate to have great support from many of our country teams in Germany, Japan, Korea, and the translations are all set. We're going to go live in English, Japanese, Korean, simplified and traditional Chinese, and German on day one. I've actually decided to buy 50 press releases. I'm not releasing 50 press releases on ISO, but I'm going to have a pipeline of 50 press releases, and we'll probably use about 10 during the ISO release, and I'll have the rest available for news. So if you have interesting news as well, and you want to push it through the wires, and it's related to OpenChain, let me know, because I'll have these EIN press newswire releases to use up. They weren't that expensive. I think it's $1,000 for 50. And that was so much cheaper than going through a marketing agency. I actually got a quote at one point for $15,000 per release if it was to be in all the languages we're using. And I was like, nope. Off to the
Not
community.
surprised. Would we be getting a heads up ahead of your press releases just so that we can get news out a lot?
Yes.
Be ready to send news out. Brilliant.
Yes, I mean, the minute ISO give me a release date, that goes to all of you. It'll go across all the partners, all of the main lists, and so on. So, yeah, and that won't be the announcement. That'll be the announcement is coming exactly at this time.
Brilliant.
And if there's anything I can do to help you with your press, just let me know. This meeting, by the way, is going to be a little bit bigger than just the specification. We're going to touch on a few other things. The OSS reference tooling. We're going to touch on what the education group is doing. We're going to touch a little bit on the reference library, which is significantly updated, a little bit on the partners, and then we're going to also touch on Spdx because there's some important stuff happening there. But before we do that, spec bit. And I just wanted to check, Mark, what do you think about going through the 2.1 draft again as a refresher to people? Not in detail, but just kind of an overview, because we're so eminent with the ISO release. Maybe a refresher would help people. What do you think?
Sure. Sure. In other words, not today though, right?
Well, I think we could do some of it today.
We can start it today, yeah. I mean, okay. I mean, I'd have to think about it a little because I want to make sure it's succinct, right? But it seems like we have a number of topics. So, okay, I'll let me give it a quick thought and then.
All right, I'll tell you what I'll do as a spoiler. I'm going to pull up the past submission document that we sent to ISO, and my editor said there might have been 1 or 2 minor changes for the final submission, but this is in essence pretty much the exact document that ISO will be publishing. The reason it's highlighted with colors here was just to tell our translators what not to touch, because Korea already decided to translate this spec.
Let me ask, do we get a number yet?
Not yet. Oh yeah, you joined after I let you know. So yeah, I mean, we're overdue for ISO to give us our number and publish. They did give me a heads up last Monday that they had a week-long plenary session, so they were going to be swamped. But you know, technically speaking, our 6 weeks ended on November 3rd. I expected by latest to have it November 10th. There's nothing left to do on paperwork or administration. So it's literally just when they decide to hit publish. I've asked them for the exact date and time. I'm optimistic it could be this week, but we're entirely at their mercy on when they actually publish. As soon as they give me the time scale, as soon as they give me the number, that'll go straight to everyone. And that'll go ahead of the press release. So literally, as soon as I get their email, I'm telling all of you what our number is and when we're going to formally announce.
I'm going to ask if I can get a 24-day advance notice because I want to put it in and put the spec out with the number before and make sure we get it on the web. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So it depends how much time they give us before they hit publish, but we do have this stuff.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. As soon as I get it, I'm going to put it into the PDF and just formally, just make sure everything looks okay and then push it out.
Yeah, sounds good. And so everyone, this is the ISO standard, currently termed DIS 5230, Draft International Standard 5230. All voting, all of that is done. Nothing to happen to this document. You'll notice that this document is a little bit different in its layout to OpenChain 2.0. And this question has come up many times, so I just want to reiterate, OpenChain 2.0 is functionally identical to this. DIS 5230, sometimes referred to as OpenChain 2.1. The only thing that's changed is the formatting for ISO. And our formatting with the thing spread across 6 goals and so on isn't the way that ISO formatted stuff. But you can see the basic structure remained the same. Instead of having our 6 goals split into chapters, basically everything is bundled under requirements, but it's still 6 parts. And not much has changed in wording or anything like that. Just a few bits and pieces in how we set things up for the ISO people. The one thing that my editor said was removed was normative references, which here talks about Spdx and some other stuff. He mentioned that was removed. I'll need to double check with ISO if it was. If it was removed, it was just a process thing because that's what they needed to do. In ISO, a few different things. For one reason or another, they don't capitalize terms and definitions. I don't know why that is, but there you go. When it comes to our talk through on the stuff, the policies, competence, and all of that, again, the only thing that's happened is that a language has been aligned with what ISO does. We have no changes in meaning and so on. What this means.
One thing to mention, I think, is you're correct. The semantics haven't changed. If you're compliant with 2021 but the numbering has changed in a way that if you have done your own internal self-conformance, the numberings are different. So, for example, we have created a record, and for every single section or subsection of the spec, we refer to the evidence of that in our conformance process. So the only thing you might want to do is make sure that the new numberings is mapping correctly to your evidence. That's the only thing I think that people have to be mindful of. Yeah.
That's a good point. And maybe one thing we can do in the next week or two is maybe create a little map guide, just show people the cheat sheet of how to map from 2 to ISO. And some people are conforming right now to OpenChain 2 to become ISO conformant, which is an interesting thing to note. And that's perfectly valid. I'm working on the new questionnaire. which will be up there with all the other questionnaires under self-certification. But honestly, you don't need to use a different questionnaire right now. You can just conform to OpenChain 2.0. Let me pull up some other stuff. So self-certification is the same as always. It currently does not include the ISO one because we have to tease out the slightly changed questions. But like I said, you can just conform to 2 if you want to be ISO conformant, and we will make a map so you can see how to map the various.
Shane, this is
Yeah.
myself. One question I have, since we were just talking about the ISO standard not changing the current version 2.1. Yeah. When we look into chapter 6 and 6.1, 6.2 about conformance and duration and so on. So how does this work with the ISO? Because it's interesting. In 6.1 we say in order for a program to be deemed OpenChain conformance organization must affirm and so on. Does this also work with an ISO? Because for an ISO to be conformant wouldn't normally get certified against the ISO.
Yes, in fact, I'm just going to pull up the exact part of the thing if I can find my screen share. Come on, Zoom, where's the control? Sorry, slight delay here. I need to find my Zoom controls.
Because this is a question I recently discussed with a client, how this works.
The answer is that it's in the ISO document that passed, and I'm just trying to get Zoom to give me back my screen control so I can show that to you. Zoom. Bear with me a second. There we go. Right, so let's pull up the ISO document again. Here's the exact wording in the ISO document. So it's exactly the same. So conformance is precisely the same. Organization affirms the program satisfies the requirements. And duration is precisely the same, 18 months. So no changes. So in the context of ISO, what we were doing met their requirements without any blocks.
It's interesting that this didn't trigger any questions from the wider community. Also the duration part, I just stepped over it recently, because a program that is OpenChain conformant with this version of specification shall last 18 months from the date conformance validation was obtained.
I'm just going to pull up China's comments on this.
Can you help me understand a little bit more about what the problem is? I don't quite understand.
Yeah, not particular problem. I was just thinking how this works with ISO and certification, because normally when you certify against an ISO, this certification is valid for normally 3 years, and you do regular updates to check that the program or the organization is still compliant. But normally the duration for a certification is 3 years. So this is a little bit different to what we state here in this section.
Now, is it always assumed with an ISO certification that you have a third party involved?
I mean, if it's an ISO certification standard, that's what you normally would do. I mean, of course, still an organization can say I'm compliant to the ISO and not get certified by a third party. That's also possible for sure, yes.
Yeah, I think part of the motivation here was to, largely most people are self-certifying. And I'm not saying, I'm just explaining the history or behind it, but that we want people to be able to make a statement that they're conforming. And we're not asking every year. I know what you're saying. Every year they might have someone come in and do a quick check on certain things if they're having a third-party certification. What we're trying to do is just have people do it on a self basis, and that they need to make sure that they check in with their own processes within 18 months, every 18 months.
Yeah.
to make sure they're current. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. So actually, you are ISO compliant when you fulfill this requirement that every 18 months you check your program to be compliant.
Your compliance, as long as 6.11 and 6.121 are satisfied, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you first achieve a conformance, and then every 18 months you have to redo number 611, right? You have to redo it.
I want to show you what China said, which is interesting because, again, we didn't have a blocker on any of this. The reason I'm putting up China is because that was the most verbose geography in terms of comments. And by the way, China made comments, but they didn't expect, they didn't suggest changes. They just made comments. Okay, here we go. So China and Japan provided comments. And China went through various sections. So section 2.4, 2.1, and 2.7, 3.2. They didn't actually make any comments on the substance of the standard, which is all under 4. They just talked about kind of preliminary information and so on, I think. Unless they moved our numbering around. They might have moved our numbering around. I'll check.
So on that, I mean, can I just say something on that 18 months? We have decided actually we will put a statement on our external website to say that our OpenChain conformance is valid for 18 months from the date of conformance, and the plan is to revisit that and validate that we're still conformant in 18 months, and then change the date and extend it. Because I have to say, I struggle with it. Where do we keep that? Do we keep it internally? Do we publish it? And in the end, we declare sort of we're conformant on our website. And I decided we would put that statement with the date of conformance plus the 18 months on our external website.
Okay. Yeah.
As a side note, I think one thing that might explain some of the potential differences of this standard rather than some of the existing ISO standards is because the JTC1 past transposition process is simply converting our standard into an international standard without an edit process. So the actual ISO IEC JTC1 past transposition is a non-editing process. It's a yes or no vote. So therefore, there might be variance in the standard compared to things that went through the editing and formation process on the country teams.
One thing we might do is take that as feedback into the next rev of the spec, right? But I think if that was to change, what would likely happen is every 12 months, if we're going to be similar to ISO, we're not really granting a 3-year certificate and then expecting every year you're doing some check. What this is simply saying is every 18 months you have to do a check. So the only thing I would see potentially is us maybe moving it to a year as opposed to 18 months, because what we're simply asking people to do is to verify that their processes are current, because we understand that processes over time decay, right? And that's, I think, the purpose behind ISO, in having someone come in and check every 12 months, not necessarily do a complete certification, right? So we can discuss this as a possible improvement to the spec in the next version.
Mm-hmm. And one more question on this topic. When we look into the 6.2, where we've just been, it also says 18 months from the date conformance validation was obtained. The conformance validation registration procedure can be found on the OpenChain project's website.
There we go.
So when we think about ISO certification, external third-party certification, the company to be assessed still needs to do a conformance validation on the OpenChain registration, with the OpenChain registration procedure, etc.
Yeah,
Well,
you're talking about the website? Yeah, are you talking about going back to the website for the verification after 18 months?
Yeah, or not only after 18 months, but also at the first time. It's the first time I understand that the conformance validation registration needs to be done through the OpenChain project's website, right?
The way I read it is the conformance validation can be whatever we say on the website. And on the website, we talk about the three options: self-certification, independent assessment, and third party. So my read is that the valid approach is whatever we state on the website, and we state all three. So for instance, PwC can certify people quite apart from our self-certification questionnaire, which is just one option that we present.
Okay. Because when they run through the conformance validation registration procedure, then their logo can also be displayed on the OpenChain project website, correct?
Yes. So if a client of yours or a client of someone who did independent assessment just lets us know that they're conformant, we put them on the website.
Okay, but they don't have to do this. They don't have to show it on the website to be compliant in the end, right?
No, and several companies are OpenChain conformant, but not on our website for various reasons.
Yeah. Okay.
Some of them are not there simply because they're an endpoint, so it's not advantage for them to sell their conformance. They actually want it for dealing with their suppliers. And some of them are not on the website because they're conformant, but they don't want to make a public announcement at this juncture because of whatever they're doing internally. Some people become conformant with a small program and then they scale up. And while they're scaling, they don't announce conformance. It's optional. I mean, not everyone is on our website. And I expect in the future that probably several companies, especially in sensitive areas like banking and whatnot, will never appear on our website. They'll just use it in supplier discussions.
That's good. As you can see, the closer we get to the ISO announcement, more detailed questions come up, and I just wanted to address them here so that we are all on the same page, or that we all understand some the same way. I think that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, that's why we're here. And I mean, one thing that you pointed out, the conformance validation procedure on our website, it actually gives us tremendous power in naming what's a valid conformance approach, which is, it's not accidental. We do want to make sure that somebody doesn't come up with something kooky, which has nothing to do with our intent.
But I guess the point is that, for example, if you start using the OpenChain logo to indicate that you're conformant, currently on the OpenChain project website, we don't actually state when that sort of conformance was obtained. And again, I looked at our own external website where we do state that we are conformant. Previously with 1.2, we didn't indicate when that conformance was obtained, nor when is it due to expire. And I decided to sort of to comply with this requirement, to specifically go and say, okay, we will not just put it on an internal ARM site, but we will also publicly display it where we state that we're conformant with OpenChain and we're using the OpenChain logo. So these could become examples of how organizations have chosen to adhere to this specific requirement.
Actually, that brings up an interesting point. We could always make image assets of conformance logos based in a year. This is just a note, but we could say, OpenChain 2.0 2020. This is not a plan. This is just Speaking out loud.
Yeah, but I guess in that year you could be in different times of the year, different organizations. So it doesn't, unless you give people the flexibility to add the date to it, then they can use it with the specific date. That could be one other option.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I remember China's comments were referencing 3 instead of 4. Of course they did. I'm stupid. They got rid of the normative reference section, which was section 2. So everything got compressed. This is the actual final ISO document, which is exactly the same as the editable document I showed you a minute ago, except it got rid of the normative reference section because normative references touched on Spdx, but Spdx is included already in the definitions, and according to ISO, it wasn't needed to have a normative references section. But anyway, China's comments all the way through didn't touch on what we had there in section 6 about the affirmation of the program or the duration. So no issues were raised about this approach we have, even though it differs from ISO standard. This PDF document, I would love to send it to everyone, but I'm not allowed by ISO. So just to give you a note on what it says here, this particular document is for Seth Newbury of Joint Development Foundation, and I have a copy for review as well. Unfortunately, ISO doesn't give us free distribution of the final document, but the one I just showed you in Microsoft Word is the same. The only thing I have to do here is delete normative references, and we're fine. And this particular document is already being translated, minus the ISO boilerplate. So that'll be what's available on our website. If you're interested in having access to that, of course, we can give you access to it. Just email me. Okay. But yeah, no particular changes and no extra requirements, anything like that. Everything's looking solid. The updated questionnaire will not differ greatly from the existing questionnaire, just the numbering will be a little bit different. And as we discussed earlier, I will make a numbering map to make it easier for everyone. Okay, now I have a couple of items to show you. Google Chrome collaborates with me. I wanted to touch on some of the other stuff happening around the project. A lot of people ask us about our tooling group, and our tooling group is both super productive and not always productive in the ways that we need for our general audience. So tooling is incredible in that we have so many people working on so many things. We don't yet have the example turnkey tooling that we had previously talked about. We are getting closer. We do have commitments to have set up and running of fussology and set up and running of ORT. So that'll be 2 major tooling items that will be done live in a webinar, recorded, and the example made available to people later. I'm working on scheduling those, ideally one this month and one next month. I think we've got scan code as well. So we aren't quite where we wanted to be with turnkey tooling, but we've come a long way in contextualizing tooling in general. So for instance, there's a pretty comprehensive overview of the tooling landscape, which includes not just describing what type of tools there are out there, but it includes overviews of existing tools. And you'll notice it might be small to read, but on the left, we have a tremendous amount of open source tools visible. And it tells you about what they are, what license they're under, and so on. I'm just putting that in the chat right away. So the open source reference tooling group is meeting at a very rapid schedule bi-weekly. And often it's a presentation about a tool. I just put the mailing list link in the chat. Often it's a presentation about a tool along with news and updates. Like I said, we're going to have those webinars scheduled really soon. We have had requests for that out of geographies like China. So I'm very glad that people like Philip at Scan Code and so on, and Sebastian. Sebastian's at Bosch, right? I can't remember where Sebastian's at. These people are stepping up to help do the webinars. But even today, our reference tooling group is very busy. You can see that the mailing list is pretty active. We have a lot of great material, and they record their events. So for instance, here Oliver notes the recording of the last meeting. So you can easily access everything they're doing on GitHub. I'm going to now put in the chat a direct access to all of their meetings on GitHub. I don't expect you to go through them, but it just shows that it's there and it's a lot of material. I wanted to pause here and see if people had any questions about the tooling group and what they're up to. All right. No questions. Then we move on to education. Our education work group has had 2 meetings. We just posted the recordings of those 2 meetings. And the short version is that we're taking the OpenChain reference slides and we're going to make them into a free online course licensed under CC0. I just got an email from the LF training team that said they're also happy to give us open source compliance training for developers, a pre-existing course under CC0 as well. So we can combine a pre-existing course for developers with our reference training slides, and in collaboration with LF training, make a new OpenChain online reference training. I will have a call this week with LF training about what's the most appropriate thing. For instance, we often used edX, and we'll see if that's the most appropriate format for the new training we're building. What's going to happen here with the education work group is we've got about 32 people involved, and essentially they're going to have a look at what format LF training needs, take our slides, take the existing compliance basics for developers, combine it into one outline, and then LF training will do the heavy lifting on making it into an online course for us. This will be a reference course. It's not intended to be the official open source compliance course for the world. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. It'll be just like our slides, but it will be available. It will be free. It will be CC0, so you can incorporate parts of it or all of it into your existing internal or service provision as you want. I wanted to flag that because it's a nice thing we didn't have momentum to do before. So that's right there. Any questions on that? No questions. We move on to the next interesting thing. As you know, OpenChain has a partner program. If you're new, you may not know that our partner program, like everything else we do, is transparent. You can go to the mailing list and see what the partners are up to. Everything is there. It's a normal mailing list, and you're very welcome to join. In fact, we've got 50 members, so I think several of our members are not partners. There are other people just sitting in. And I wanted to flag that just because as we go through OpenChain's ISO graduation and all the PR and everything, just to underline, we're always going to be super open and everything is super accessible. So you can track, for example, what we're doing with the partner program direct on the partner list. Talking about stuff we're doing, right now, the OpenChain reference library is undergoing an enormous improvement of structure to make it much easier to locate information because we've got so many documents. This is nearly complete. My admin staff are working on a few details right now, but some of the examples, I'll just pull up what Rachel just did. Where did she put it? Okay, over here. Some of the examples would be that we had updates, I can't get there. We had updates to how some of the files are set up and usable. I think it was in flowcharts. This is in a temporary folder. It says end draft, but our flowcharts and so on are being updated to be in the official OpenChain branding instead of blank, which was the initial format distributed to us. So the reference library as a whole will have a lot more branded material placed under the topic official, and where it's pure community, you'll find it under community subfolders. But there's a lot more official documentation in place. I wanted to flag that because the reference library, we're always trying to make it easier to use, but this time we're doing the biggest rearrangement we've ever done, and it should be finished by tomorrow, close of business. Final thing I wanted to cover, unless people have questions about the reference library. Any questions on that? Okay. Just one thing I'll show you on the reference library. On the website, right now, it's just telling people to go direct to GitHub for the reference material. That's a placeholder. It's been there for a couple of days. It will be gone tomorrow, and there'll be lots more of our material with nice screenshots on this page. This is just related to doing the reorg and moving files around. Okay, next thing I wanted to touch on was Spdx. You're probably familiar with the Spdx website. If you're not, I highly recommend going there. Spdx is submitted to ISO in this exact same process as OpenChain. And therefore, we expect graduation end of first quarter or sometime in second quarter 2021. I personally expect probably second quarter 2021 based on the OpenChain experience. You can always join in with Spdx. They've got frequent meetings and a vibrant community by going to the mailing list, and I just shared the link in the chat. Many of our OpenChain people are on Spdx as well, so you'll bump into people like Sammy and so on there all the time. Sammy, I think you're on almost all the calls, right?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, I tend to join whenever I can. Unfortunately, for example, I missed the training session last week. But generally, if I can, I tend to join. I think it just provides a degree of continuity.
And it's got great coverage on the mailing list from 2010 to today, and 581 people on it. So it's a very active community. Highly recommended, especially because, well, there are pre-existing ISO standards for software bill of materials. Well, there's one. Let me see if I can pull it up. There we go. There's a thing called SWID, which is an existing ISO standard. This standard, ISO 19770-2, is not super widely used. Spdx is more widely used. So Spdx, as it graduates ISO, is likely to have significantly more traction than pre-existing standards. Now, again, it's horses for courses. SWID, it's software asset management, though the bias in practical usage has been towards security rather than what we've been doing in terms of essentially license identification, version identification, and so on. I just wanted to flag that because Spdx is super important. It's a sister project and it's going to be doing a lot of stuff. Speaking of which, we have the Open Compliance program in the Linux Foundation. Most of this website was updated recently, though obviously the bottom here is saying that 2018 wasn't. This is designed to be the umbrella for all of our work. So the concept of the Open Compliance program is to show people what we do in standards, communities, training, and tooling. This website is a little bit dry, and it's getting a substantial overhaul. In fact, my admin is tasked with getting us edit access. This week, you should see OpenChain as an ISO standard very much front and center, Spdx as under consideration standard very much front and center. While we still have great tooling like Fossology, it's becoming pretty clear that our strongest action in open compliance right now is actually our specifications. So Open Compliance Program will make strong reference to those. Though honestly, the best place to direct people for general stuff right now is the OpenChain project, because we just have such a wealth of information and this website is continually updated. So right now, this minute, this is the place to go and start your journey in open compliance. But the general LF Open Compliance Program website will be refreshed and it will be ready for our OpenChain ISO release as well. Just wanted to flag these things to let you know that various moving pieces like our tooling work group has a lot of material. It's got its own website. It's busy on stuff. Education team working on online training is brilliant. The fact that Spdx is becoming an ISO standard is really important. The massive overhaul of the OpenChain website, particularly the reference material on GitHub, is vitally important for the future. And just a heads up that we will have an umbrella explanation website fully up to date, which will be a great place for people to go to keep track of what's an ISO standard, what's under work, what's different, and so on and so forth. All right, I'm going to pause there. Any questions? All right, no questions. In which case we're wrapping up soon. Okay, so to reiterate, OpenChain self-certification questionnaire is showing OpenChain spec version 2 as the latest version, and that's accurate. We're still waiting on the ISO publication date, which is due any moment now. As soon as they give it to me, I give it to you. And probably what will happen is that ISO will publish and we will do the press release very shortly after, but we could take a little bit of extra time, like 24 hours or 48 hours, if we need to for one reason or another. As Mark mentioned, we might need a tiny bit of time to make sure the spec and so on is updated on the website and that the self-certification questionnaire with the newest version is all ready to go. Yeah, but any minute now will be an ISO release. However, right now, if people certify to OpenChain 2, they'll meet the ISO requirements. So your clients, yourself, just go to the self-certification questionnaire and certify. You're in the right place and doing the right thing. People should probably go to the OpenChain website, check it out, make sure everything's looking good. We're under rapid work. As I said, the library is under the most work, but the whole website is getting a refresh again. You should be aware, and you will find great support in areas like our education work group, our tooling work group, and our main mailing list. If you want to track Spdx, but you don't have time to join the community, don't worry, I'll continue to push key information on our list. And beyond that, in essence, that's what we have on the work team updates. There's an awful lot happening across the project. Our work teams are crazy busy, and more generally, we have an incredibly busy outreach schedule across the project. So for example, we have multiple webinars across this month, internal to OpenChain and external with other parties like DL and Piper. We have a lot of companies getting ready for ISO conformance. The scheduling is unknown on when everyone will release, but we know on the day of conformance now we're expecting 3 major companies to announce. So it's going to be hectic. I am purchasing 50 press releases direct through EIN Newswire because that's $1,000, and I was quoted by a marketing agency $15,000 for one press release. So that's not exactly the best price we could get. Our community has been fantastic, not just in OpenChain in general, but in doing things. Let's see if I can pull up our ISO release. In doing things like taking our ISO press release, which is actually done, and putting it into lots of different languages, all ready for our release. If you're curious, you can just drop in and see that ISO release right now. And with that, we're done, unless there are any questions, comments, or suggestions.
Hey, Shane, question about, hey, Shane, this is Dave Marr.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, so on the website, it looks great. Do we happen to know which areas of the website are more popular? Do we have metrics around where people tend to go?
Yep. So right now, we see the most traffic on the website is in two places. Well, of course, the landing page, but Adopt the Standard and the reference material is where people go. Adopt the Standard gets the most hits in frequency, and this is the guide to how to do it. We've simplified this a great deal based on what people were clicking through to after this. So web app or off to the partners they go. And then there's the preparation pages they go to. The next most popular thing is the reference material, which is under heavy revision right now. So at this moment, and this went live on Saturday, it'll be going offline on Tuesday. At this moment, it redirects people to GitHub because we're reorganizing GitHub to make it much more logical for the ISO release. On Tuesday, this reference library will revert to its normal state, which is to have a lot of our key material with images and so on this page before finally redirecting to GitHub. So yeah, adoption and then reference material. People spend a lot more time on the reference material page than on the adoption page. On adoption, they basically go adopt and almost always off to the web app or the partners. It's quite rare for people to go to the spec or even to go to the frequently asked questions.
Thanks. Yeah, that really helps. And I like the thought that you had on, providing those links, instead of having people go to GitHub directly in all cases.
Yeah. So in our traditional approach to the reference material, and I'll just show you this. So it's got this 4-day period where we're revamping ahead of the ISO traffic. But what it normally has all the time, you can see here the slightly faded. It goes to the case studies, it goes to the training material. It's got different buttons on it, supplier guides, and so on and so forth. So apart from this 4-day window, the reference page is full of images to guide people. It's just redirecting to GitHub during these hours because of the substantial reorganization, which changes the links.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, and one reason we're doing it right now is because we have a drop-off in conformance traffic activity right now pre-ISO. So even though people could use OpenChain 2.0 for conformance, it seems by and large our existing community is on pause for the ISO release. They've been on pause for a couple of weeks now in terms of going for conformance and going through the material in mass. And we do expect as soon as ISO is released to have multiples of our normal visitor traffic. So that's why we're right now doing the GitHub reorg at the beginning of this week.
Sounds great. Thanks, Shane.
You're welcome. Yeah, some interesting metrics and some interesting things. Our news goes back years. It's many hundreds of posts. And one thing we found with the GitHub is that we had some reports that people were back looking at posts from 2017 on the weekend. And we got 2 reports of broken links. And it was a case of, what? So we're going through all of the 800 and something posts, and wherever we find a link to the reference library, we're fixing it. So that's a big one. I think Google has particularly put a few of our items higher up on the search results. So we had a few people coming through, and yep, we are monitoring click-throughs to prioritize where people are clicking. But yeah, it was a surprise that people on Saturday reported a 2017 news post as having a broken link. They're cool. What are they doing compliance on Saturday for? That's crazy. But yeah.
Compliance is fun.
No, it's not. But yeah, everything's under control. And we are actually following metrics a lot more on the website and so on than in the early days of the project. And that's one reason that if you look at the navigation up here on the website about the standard Get Help reference material, it's pretty light because those are where people were going. Other things that had been in the menu previously just weren't getting traffic, so we got rid of them. Well, we've relocated them deeper in the website. So the current website is based on click-throughs and what we see people doing. Okay, one thing I will be changing just as a side note, I'm thinking about how to make the path to the partners on the first page improved. I'm working with Nathan Kumagai from Qualcomm on this. We're going to be updating the landing page in the next couple of days and couple of weeks to try to make the initial capture of new audience as seamless as possible. Currently, our feedback is it seems to be going well, but we're going to try and make it better and put more stuff here for one-click solutions for new people arriving.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, any further questions? If there's no further questions, I would just like to say thank you to everyone. I wish you a great week. We'll be back with the global work team calls in 2 weeks. Meanwhile, next week, we're going to have another OpenChain webinar. And the ISO release date, everything is done. I'm just waiting on them to give us the go. As soon as they give us the number and the publication date, you get that information. And we're very happy to work with you for your publicity around this as well, especially if you're announcing conformance or similar. We can echo that. Take care, everyone. Have a great week and talk to you soon.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Shane.
Shane.
Soon.
Bye.
Bye.